My dad suspended me from our family's multi-million-dollar medical corporation until I apologized to my golden child sister. I just looked him in the eye and said, "All right." The next morning, she walked into the office, ready to brag, until she saw my empty desk and the envelope I left behind. The company lawyer rushed in, completely shaken, asking if I had really posted it. What happened after that didn't just shake my family. It exposed everything they tried to hide. And if you've ever been blamed for telling the truth, you'll understand why I made the choice I did. To understand how we reached that moment, you need to know what life was like in my family. My dad, Alistair, built Origin Medical from one small clinic into a company people admired. On the outside, it looked perfect. Inside, it was a different story. My sister, Tatum, was treated like she could do no wrong. She was charming, loud, and always in the spotlight. Everyone praised her for ideas that weren't even hers, and every mistake she made was forgiven before she finished making it. I was the opposite. I stayed quiet, focused on real work, and didn't care for attention. But in my family, being quiet meant being invisible. No matter what I achieved, graduating top of my class, earning a law degree, nothing was enough to stand beside Tatum's shine. The only one who ever noticed how hard I worked was my mom, Eleanor. She understood me without needing explanations. When she passed away from cancer, the last bit of balance in our home disappeared. After that, everything revolved around making Tatum look like the future leader of the company. I joined Origin as head of compliance because I believed in doing things the right way. I built systems that kept the company safe, and every time a problem was avoided, it came through my team's work. But public credit always went to Tatum, who loved cameras more than policies. She handled the fun side, events, interviews, anything that made her look successful. Still, I kept going, thinking my father would see my value eventually. Instead, he acted like I was replaceable. When I found major issues in one of Tatum's projects, I expected him to take it seriously. Instead, he viewed me as a threat to the image he created around her. That's how we reached the day he demanded I apologize. Not because I was wrong, but because he wanted to protect the daughter he favored. When I said, "All right," it wasn't surrender. It was the moment I realized I didn't need their approval anymore. It was the moment I stopped fighting for a place they never intended to give me. And that single decision set everything else in motion. I spent most of my time at Origin focused on my work, not the attention that came with it. My job was simple in theory: protect the company by making sure every rule was followed. Over the years, I built a team that handled problems quietly and quickly, the kind of issues that never reached the news because we caught them before they grew. I didn't expect praise. I just wanted the company to run the way it should. While I was focused on the details, Tatum was busy promoting her newest project, a patient program she called Vitality Plus. It sounded impressive when she talked about it. She gave interviews, held events, and acted like she had discovered a miracle solution for the healthcare system. Everyone around her treated it like the future of Origin. I stayed out of it, trusting that if anything needed my attention, it would show up sooner or later. That moment came when my team and I reviewed the program as part of our routine checks. At first, I thought it would be simple. New programs often had minor errors, nothing serious. But the more I looked, the more things didn't make sense. Bills were higher than they should have been. Tests were ordered when they weren't needed. Some patient files had the exact same phrases copied and pasted, as if someone wasn't even trying to hide what they were doing. It didn't feel like random mistakes. It felt planned. I dug deeper, pulling records from different clinics that used the program. The same patterns appeared everywhere. It became clear that this wasn't an accident or misunderstanding. Someone had created a system that encouraged people to charge for things patients didn't need. It was illegal, and it put the entire company at risk. If insurance companies discovered what was happening, Origin could face huge fines or even criminal charges. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I searched for the source. That meant looking through internal messages, instructions, and meetings connected to the program. What I found left me cold. The pressure to push these inflated charges came directly from memos approved and encouraged by Tatum. She used polite business phrases, but the meaning was obvious. She told teams to increase billable opportunities and use creative methods to grow numbers. Anyone who works in compliance knows what those words mean. They are a way of telling people to bend the rules without saying it outright. Seeing her name on those documents hit me harder than I expected. I always knew she loved attention, But I never imagined she would risk the entire company just to make her project look successful. The more evidence I found, the clearer the picture became. Vitality Plus wasn't a revolutionary idea. It was a cover for a scheme that could destroy everything Origin built. I realized then that I couldn't stay silent. If I ignored it, the blame would eventually fall on me and my department. And more importantly, it was wrong. But I also knew that exposing the truth would cause a storm none of us were prepared for. Even so, I had no choice. Once you see the cracks, you can't pretend the building is stable anymore. I spent days putting everything together, making sure every point was backed by clear proof. I organized emails, billing records, instructions, and timelines so there would be no confusion about what happened. I believed my father would appreciate the truth, even if it was difficult to hear. I thought he would see that fixing the problem quickly was the only way to protect the company. With that hope, I printed the report, placed it in a binder, and walked into his office. He didn't even look up at first. When he finally did, his face showed irritation instead of concern. I explained what I had found and why it couldn't be ignored. I told him it was important for us to act before someone outside the company uncovered it. He listened silently, his expression flat, giving no hint of how he felt. When I finished, he took the binder and said he would call a board meeting so everyone could understand the situation. The meeting took place the next morning. I sat at the long table, surrounded by people who helped shape the company. I expected shock, questions, maybe even arguments about how to move forward. What I got instead felt like being pushed into cold water. My father opened the meeting by calling the report unexpected, his voice tense. Then he handed the binder to Tatum. She flipped through the pages for barely a minute before she closed it sharply. Her eyes were full of anger, not because of what she'd done, but because I had exposed it. She stood up and told the board that I had created a story to make her look bad. She said I was trying to ruin her project because I envied her success. Not a single person questioned her. They just listened. I tried to explain the evidence again, but she talked over me, accusing me of being dramatic and divisive. My father didn't stop her. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, looking at me with the kind of disappointment I used to see when I forgot to clean my room as a child. He said my actions were out of line and claimed I had exaggerated the problem. It was like he had already made up his mind before walking into the room. Then he told the board that I was damaging team spirit. He said the report created stress and made people feel attacked. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was trying to save the company, yet somehow I had become the problem. The board voted in agreement, following his lead without hesitation. No one even asked me a single question about the evidence. When my father announced my suspension, I felt the floor shift under me. 30 days without pay. For doing my job. For telling the truth. And then, as if that wasn't enough, he looked directly at me and said I needed to write a personal apology to Tatum before returning to work. It was the final cut, delivered without hesitation. I walked out of that room knowing something had broken inside me, something that wouldn't be repaired by silence or obedience. Their choice was clear, and it wasn't me. When I walked out of that boardroom, something inside me went completely still. I didn't cry, argue, or try to defend myself anymore. I just felt this cold clarity settle over me, like a switch had been flipped. The people I trusted had shown me exactly where I stood, and there was no reason to pretend otherwise. I told my father, all right, not because I accepted his decision, but because I finally understood that nothing I said would change his mind. He had chosen a version of the truth that suited him, and I wasn't part of it. The ride home felt strangely quiet. I didn't replay the meeting in my head or wonder how things could have gone differently. Instead, I sat in the silence and thought about what came next. For years, I believed keeping the peace would eventually earn me respect, but that belief had turned into a cage. Now that it was gone, I could finally see what choices were left. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. When I entered my apartment, the weight of the decision in front of me finally sank in. Reporting the company wasn't a small step. It meant exposing people who shared my last name. It meant risking the thing my mother worked so hard to support. The thought made my chest tighten. I stood in my living room for a long moment, trying to decide if I could really do it. Then I remembered something my mother once told me during a difficult time. Protecting everyone else while breaking yourself is not loyalty, it's surrender. She had always seen the pressure I carried, even if no one else did. Thinking about her, I realized she wouldn't want me to stay silent just to maintain a false image of family unity. She raised me to do the right thing, even when it was uncomfortable. That memory pushed me forward. I picked up my phone and made the first call to a whistleblower attorney I had met at a seminar. Back then, I didn't imagine I'd ever need his help, but I saved his number because his advice was practical and honest. When he answered, I explained the situation in a steady voice. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he said we needed to move quickly. Hearing his calm, professional tone made everything feel real. The second call was even harder. I reached out to an old friend of my mother's who handled estate matters. I didn't expect anything surprising. I only wanted legal guidance, not emotional comfort. But when I told her what happened, she asked me to come in first thing in the morning. Her urgency made me uneasy, but I agreed. The next day, she handed me documents I had never seen before. My mother had left instructions that only this lawyer could access under certain conditions. Inside those papers was a detail that changed everything. She had placed 25% of Origen's shares into a trust under my name. No one else knew, not even my father. In that moment, the ground shifted again, but in a completely different way. I realized I had more influence than anyone expected. My mother hadn't just believed in me, she had prepared me. And now, for the first time, I understood exactly what she wanted me to do. Tatum walked into the building the next morning, expecting a show. She probably imagined me waiting outside my office, embarrassed, ready to apologize just to get back what they took from me. She always believed people would bend to her, especially me. But when she stepped into my workspace, the scene didn't match the story she had created in her mind. The shelves were empty, the drawers open, and every file or personal item was gone. The only thing left was a plain envelope placed in the center of the desk. She opened it, and the color drained from her face. It wasn't a plea for forgiveness. It wasn't an apology. It was my formal resignation, short, clear, and final. She stood frozen, trying to make sense of it. For someone used to winning every argument by raising her voice or flashing a smile, the silence of that empty office must have felt like a slap. Before she could recover, the door burst open and Julian Croft rushed in. Julian rarely lost his composure, so seeing him breathless was unusual. He was holding his phone, staring at it as if it had personally betrayed him. When he looked at Tatum, his expression made it clear that something serious had happened. He asked her a question that filled the room with instant tension. He wanted to know if I had filed a whistleblower report. His voice cracked halfway through the sentence. Julian understood what a whistleblower filing meant, and he also understood the kind of trouble that came with it: regulators, audits, penalties, and headlines that could damage the company overnight. He wasn't panicking for me. He was panicking for Origen, for the fallout, for the storm that was about to land on all of them. Tatum didn't answer him. She just stared at the letter in her hand, caught between confusion and denial. She didn't want to believe I had the courage to take a step she would never risk. She opened her mouth like she was about to speak, but nothing came out. That was when the elevator doors opened behind them. I stepped out, calm and steady, not rushed or flustered. The silence that followed was heavy. Julian turned toward me like he hoped I would tell him this was a misunderstanding. But I didn't soften my words. I told him clearly that yes, I had submitted the whistleblower file, and every document had already reached the authorities. There was no way to undo it, no button to press that would make it disappear. Tatum finally looked at me, her expression shifting from shock to something close to fear. She wasn't used to situations she couldn't talk herself out of. She wasn't used to consequences. Before either of them could speak, I added something else. I told them I wasn't acting only as a former employee. I was acting as the controlling shareholder of the trust my mother left behind. With that authority, I was launching an internal investigation. Not a request. Not a suggestion. A decision. The message was simple. They no longer controlled the narrative. They no longer controlled me. The morning they thought would humiliate me ended up being the moment they realized their world had changed, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. The moment the investigation became official, everything inside Origen shifted. It wasn't a slow change or a gradual decline. It was immediate, sharp, and impossible to hide. Departments that once operated with confidence suddenly went quiet. People who used to speak freely now whispered in hallways, unsure who knew what or how deep the problem went. The building itself felt different, as if the walls were holding their breath. Federal regulators didn't waste time. They sent notices, demanded documents, and scheduled interviews. The board received direct communication outlining the scope of the inquiry. The tone of those letters made it clear that the situation was far beyond an internal misunderstanding. When the board realized their own signatures appeared on certain approvals, fear replaced every bit of confidence they once had. They had ignored warnings, approved risky proposals, and relied heavily on the image Tatum created. Now, every one of those decisions was under a microscope. The financial partners who once praised Origen's growth quickly distanced themselves. Insurance companies paused reimbursements until the investigation reached clarity. That one move alone disrupted operations across every department. Revenue streams halted overnight. Meetings were canceled. Projects were frozen. Executives who had once walked with pride now avoided eye contact. Then the media stepped in. Tatum had always loved the spotlight. She was comfortable on camera, always ready with bright smiles and polished statements. But the same reporters who once applauded her business strategies were now calling nonstop, asking for comments about alleged fraud. Headlines spread across major outlets, questioning leadership practices, billing tactics, and oversight failures. Each headline brought more pressure, more eyes, and more doubt. My father tried to shield himself from the storm at first, insisting it was all exaggerated, but he couldn't escape the truth for long. When he finally learned who controlled the mysterious Trust, the look on his face changed in a way I had never seen. For years, he assumed that missing block of shares belonged to an outside investor or someone the board kept confidential. To discover it was mine left him speechless. He didn't get angry. He didn't shout. He just looked tired, as if the years of ignoring me had finally caught up to him. He had built the company from scratch, but he had built it with blind spots. One of those blind spots was me. Now that oversight was costing him everything he once believed was untouchable. Tatum's reaction was different. Her confidence crumbled quickly. For someone used to admiration, facing scrutiny was unbearable. Subpoenas arrived with her name on them. Calls from reporters became constant. Invitations to events disappeared. Her curated world, built on charm and shortcuts, couldn't withstand real accountability. She had no experience dealing with consequences, so every new development pushed her further into panic. Inside the company, the unraveling continued. Employees who once supported Tatum now avoided her. The board held emergency meetings, struggling to find ways to contain the damage. But the situation had already grown too large, too public, and too legally serious to cover up. Origen wasn't collapsing because of competitors or market problems. It was falling apart because truth finally reached the surface. And the truth came from the person they least expected. The daughter who had spent years standing quietly at the edge of their world, watching, understanding, and waiting for the moment when silence was no longer an option. The board moved fast because they had no other option. Everything around them was falling apart, and they needed answers before the situation grew even worse. They set an emergency meeting for the next morning, and everyone who had a say in the company's direction was required to be there. This time, I didn't walk in as someone waiting for approval. I entered the room as the largest shareholder, the one person they could not ignore anymore. The atmosphere was tense the moment I stepped inside. The people who once dismissed me kept their eyes lowered. My father sat at one end of the table, shoulders stiff, staring at the documents in front of him like he could change what they said just by looking hard enough. Tatum sat beside him, her confident smile nowhere to be seen. She looked smaller somehow, as if the weight of the last few days had finally reached her. The board began by reviewing the findings. I didn't have to say anything. The numbers, communications, and records spoke for themselves. Everything that had been brushed aside before was now impossible to hide. Every inflated claim, every instruction that encouraged wrongdoing, every attempt to stretch rules beyond recognition was there in black and white. No one could pretend it was a misunderstanding or a miscalculation. Tatum tried to defend herself first. She said she only pushed those practices because she felt pressure to meet expectations. She pointed at my father, saying he constantly demanded growth and results. Her voice shook as she talked, but the documents didn't care. They showed she wasn't simply following orders. She was directing whole teams to behave recklessly. My father tried next. He said he didn't know the full extent of her actions. He insisted he trusted her too much. But he had approved budgets, signed off on proposals, and ignored warnings from people who noticed problems early on. The trail showed a pattern of looking the other way. No one interrupted them, but it was clear the room was not convinced. Excuses couldn't replace the facts laid out in front of us. When the last page was reviewed, a silence settled over the table. Then the board chair spoke. He stated clearly that leadership had failed and the company could not recover until responsibility was taken. The votes came quickly after that. My father was removed from his position as CEO. Tatum was suspended while the federal case continued. Neither of them argued. They just sat there, stunned, as if the world they built had vanished in seconds. Once the votes were final, the board turned to me. They asked if I would take control of the restructuring process. They needed someone who understood the details and had the authority to make decisions that would restore trust. Their request hung in the air, heavy and expectant. I looked at my father. His eyes were tired, almost pleading. For years he expected me to fix problems, take on burdens, and smooth things over. But this time was different. They didn't fall apart because of me. They fell apart because they refused to listen. So I told them the truth. I wasn't there to repair the damage they caused. I wasn't going to carry their mistakes on my back. I said quietly, "I'm not your cleanup crew." And for the first time, they finally understood I meant it. The fallout hit fast, and it hit hard. Once the truth came out, Origen couldn't pretend everything was fine anymore. Investors pulled back, partners demanded answers, and the company's clean image collapsed almost overnight. The fines alone were enough to shake the whole structure. But the loss of major contracts pushed them into a corner they couldn't escape. The board had no choice but to sell a controlling share to a healthcare group known for strict ethics. Something Origen had pretended to follow but never actually lived up to. With the new owners came a full reshaping of the company. Anything connected to the Rutherford name was removed. Offices changed, leadership changed, and the family pride that once dominated the building vanished completely. It was strange to watch it all happen, but there was no stopping it. Origen became something new, something cleaner, something my father could never control again. My father, Alistair, didn't fight the changes publicly. But privately, he couldn't hide how deeply it cut him. For years he walked around as if he owned the world, convinced no one could touch him. Now he works at a small community clinic far from the center of town. The job is honest, quiet, and nothing like the empire he tried to run. There is no boardroom, no spotlight, no power to command. He just shows up, clocks in, and treats whoever walks through the door. When I saw him the last time, he looked smaller, like someone carrying years of weight he finally had to feel. Tatum's fall was different, but just as sharp. For as long as I knew her, she carried herself like she was untouchable. She had the confidence of someone who believed she could bend any rule and walk away without a mark. But once her part in the scandal came out, no company wanted to be associated with her. She vanished from the city within weeks, taking whatever she could and disappearing into a new state. I heard she works in a completely unrelated field now, far away from anything close to influence. The person who once bragged about her rising future now hides from her past. What surprised me most was how quiet everything became after the chaos settled. No dramatic arguments. No attempts to defend themselves. Just silence, like they all finally realized there was nothing left to say. The power they chased for so long had slipped through their fingers, leaving them with nothing but the consequences they believed would never reach them. Watching the transformation wasn't satisfying in a loud or triumphant way. It was more like standing in the aftermath of a storm, knowing the damage couldn't be undone, but understanding the air felt clearer. The people who thought they could shape my life to fit their plans finally had to face the truth of their own actions. And for the first time, I felt like I could breathe without their shadows reaching for me. When everything ended, I finally had room to breathe. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waking up with someone else's expectations sitting on my shoulders. The noise, pressure, and constant judgment that had been normal for me were suddenly gone. The silence felt strange at first, almost too calm, like my body didn't know what to do without the usual tension. But slowly, that quiet became a kind of safety I had never experienced before. With the compensation I earned from the investigation and the work I had done during the case, I decided to create something meaningful, something that didn't involve competing, pleasing, or proving anything to anyone. I opened a small ethics consulting firm, built around one simple idea: helping companies avoid becoming what my family had turned into. I didn't want flashy offices or a giant team. I wanted a place where decisions were clear, honest, and grounded in respect for the people affected by them. The business grew slowly but steadily. Clients came mostly through referrals, small clinics, startups, a few nonprofits that wanted guidance. They appreciated my straightforward way of explaining risks and responsibilities. They weren't looking for perfection. They just wanted someone who told the truth. Every time I finished a project, I felt a sense of purpose that I'd never felt during all those years of trying to fit inside my family's world. With that new stability, I bought a modest house outside the city. It sat near the foothills, where the mountains looked close enough to touch on clear mornings. The air was crisp, the nights were quiet, and the sky actually felt big. I had space to think, something I'd never really had before. No footsteps echoing down long hallways. No raised voices behind closed doors. No whispers about expectations or legacies. Just a peaceful place where I could heal at my own pace. I also adopted a dog, a brown and white rescue who followed me everywhere with the kind of trust that almost felt overwhelming. I named him Rowan. He didn't care about my last name, my past, or what I had survived. He cared only that I came home, filled his bowl, and scratched behind his ears. Somehow, that simple loyalty softened the parts of me I thought would stay hardened forever. My days became something I didn't know I could have. Quiet mornings, steady work, long walks with Rowan before sunset, and evenings where I didn't dread tomorrow. I learned to enjoy small things. A clean kitchen, warm light through my windows, leaves moving in the wind, the comfort of earning my own peace instead of waiting for someone to grant it to me. The biggest change wasn't the house or the business or the dog. It was the shift inside me. I wasn't trying to reclaim anything that belonged to my family. I wasn't trying to step into the place they once insisted I should stand. I had no interest in taking over what had already fallen apart. Instead, I built something separate, quiet, steady, and entirely mine. For the first time, I wasn't living in anyone's shadow. I wasn't chasing approval or trying to fix people who didn't want change. I walked away from the weight they had placed on me, not out of anger, but because my life could be more than their mistakes. I didn't rise to replace them. I rose to be free. Years went by before my father finally came to see me. When he stepped onto my porch, he looked nothing like the man who once stood at the top of a company and believed he controlled the world. His shoulders were lower, his voice calmer, and the sharpness in his eyes had faded into something almost gentle. He didn't pretend nothing had happened, and he didn't try to cover the years of silence with excuses. He simply stood there, nervous in a way I had never seen before. We sat outside because he said the fresh air helped him think. There was a long pause before he spoke. He didn't talk about the company, the scandal, or the downfall. I could tell he had let those things go. Instead, he spoke about my mother. He said she had always believed I was the one who would stand firm when life pushed hard. He admitted that he never understood the kind of strength I carried, because he only valued the loud kind he recognized in Tatum. Quiet strength was invisible to him then, and he regretted that blindness. He didn't ask me to forget the past, and he didn't ask for a place in my life. He only said he wanted to be honest for once. Hearing that felt strange, like listening to a man finally learning how to speak his own truth after a lifetime of talking in polished lines. I didn't rush to comfort him, but I didn't push him away either. We talked until the light began to fade. It wasn't warm or emotional. It was soft, steady, careful, like two people rebuilding something they once burned without realizing the damage. Our relationship now is fragile but real. We don't pretend to be a perfect family. We simply meet as two people who have hurt each other and survived it. Sometimes that's enough. Later that evening, I sat alone in my office. The sun dropped behind the mountains, filling the room with a quiet orange glow. My desk was covered with plans for the future of my firm. Everything in that room was something I had built with my own choices, not the ones my family tried to force on me. I remembered the day they suspended me, thinking they could pressure me into begging. They expected fear, guilt, anything that would pull me back under their control. All I gave them were two calm words, "All right." They thought it meant surrender. Instead, it was the moment I cut the final thread tying me to their world. My revenge was never anger. It was the quiet freedom of walking away and creating a life where their power meant nothing. And as the sky darkened outside my window, I knew I had finally written a legacy that belonged only to me. Do you think I made the right choice by walking away and building my own life? Or should I have tried to fix things with them? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories like mine, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell.